welcome to our deep dive into the selfish gene.
Okay.
This book has sparked so much debate.
Oh, yeah.
And today we're going to try to understand why.
I'm excited.
It's all about looking at evolution from a gene's perspective,
Okay.
not the individual's.
Interesting.
It's kind of like trying to get inside the mind of like
Uh-huh.
a tiny, ruthless replicator.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that makes this book so fascinating is that it forces us to confront some of our assumptions about how nature works.
Yeah.
Take altruism, for example.
Okay.
We often think of altruism as selfless behavior.
Yeah.
But Dawkins argues that even altruism can be explained through the lens of selfish genes.
That always seemed like a contradiction to me.
Yeah.
How can something be selfish and altruistic at the same time?
Well, the key is to remember that Dawkins isn't saying that individual organisms are always consciously selfish.
Right.
Instead, he's saying that genes act in ways that maximize their own chances of survival and replication, even if that means sometimes leading an organism to behave in ways that seem altruistic.
So it's more about the outcome than the intention.
Exactly.
Okay.
Imagine a bird giving an alarm call when a predator approaches.
Yeah.
The bird giving the call is putting itself at risk.
Right.
But it's also potentially saving the lives of its relatives,
Oh.
who share many of its genes.
Okay.
From a gene's perspective, that's a good strategy
Yeah.
because even if the individual bird dies,
Right.
copies of its genes will likely survive in its relatives.
So it's like a genetic investment strategy.
Yes.
Spreading the risk by helping those who share your gene.
Precisely.
Okay.
And there's a mathematical formula called Hamilton's rule that helps explain this.
Wow.
It basically says that altruism is favored when the benefit to the recipient
Okay.
multiplied by the degree of relatedness
Yeah.
outweighs the cost to the altruist.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So even our most selfless acts might have a hidden layer of genetic self-interest lurking beneath the surface.
It's not about conscious self-interest,
Right.
but rather about genes blindly following the rules of natural selection.
Okay.
And that brings us to another key idea from the book.
Okay.
The concept of genes as immortal coils.
It's a mortal coil.
Dawkins uses this beautiful phrase to highlight that while individual organisms are mortal,
Right.
genes can potentially exist for millions of years, passing from body to body across countless generations.
He makes you realize that our lives are just tiny blips in the vast timeline of evolution.
Right.
But if genes are these immortal coils,
Yeah.
what does that make us?
That's a good question.
Are we just temporary vehicles for these replicators?
Dawkins uses the analogy of organisms as survival machines,
Survival machines.
built and controlled by genes.
Okay.
He's saying that our bodies, our brains,
Yeah.
even our behaviors are ultimately shaped by the genes we carry.
So we're like robots programmed by our genes.
Oh.
Makes you wonder if we have any free will at all.
That's a question that has been debated for centuries.
Right.
Dawkins doesn't deny the existence of free will,
Okay.
but he does argue that our choices are always constrained by our biological inheritance.
I see.
He uses a fascinating analogy to explain this.
Okay.
Imagine a civilization in the Andromeda galaxy trying to send a message to Earth.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They can't travel here directly,
Okay.
so instead they send instructions on how to build a computer that can decode their message.
Okay. I'm following so far.
Okay.
So the message is like our genes.
Exactly. And the computer built to decode the message is like our brain.
Right.
Our genes provide the blueprint for building our brains,
Okay.
which then interpret the world around us and guide our behavior.
Yeah.
But there's a time lag built into this system.
Huh?
The message from Andromeda was sent long ago,
Right.
and our brains are still catching up, trying to make sense of the instructions encoded in our genes.
But there's a disconnect between the genes that shaped us
Yes,
and the environment we live in today.
precisely.
Okay.
And that disconnect creates space for learning, adaptation,
Yeah.
and even a degree of free will.
Okay.
We're not just mindless robots carrying out pre-programmed instructions.
Right.
Our brains are constantly interacting with the environment, making choices,
Yeah.
and shaping our own destinies.
So it's like a nature versus nurture tango.
Yeah.
Our genes give us the basic steps.
Right.
But we can improvise and add our own flair.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And this tension between our genetic inheritance and our lived experiences plays out in all sorts of interesting ways.
Oh, yeah.
Even within families.
Okay.
Dawkins argues that there can be a conflict of interest between parents and offspring,
Right.
a battle of the generations driven by those selfish genes.
I've definitely seen that play out in my own family.
Uh-huh.
But how can parents and children be in conflict
Yeah.
if they share the same genes?
Remember, each individual is ultimately striving to maximize the survival of its own genes. And sometimes that means competing with even your closest relatives.
Wow.
Think about weaning, for example.
Okay.
From the mother's perspective, it's beneficial to stop nursing her current offspring sooner rather than later,
Yeah.
so she can conserve resources for future offspring.
But the current offspring wants to keep getting that milk for as long as possible.
Exactly. And this can lead to all sorts of interesting dynamics.
Right.
With offspring sometimes employing tactics to get more resources from their parents.
Like those kids who fake a stomachache to get out of going to school.
Yes.
Okay.
Or think about baby birds chirping loudly to beg for food.
Right.
They're essentially trying to outcompete their siblings for a larger share of the parents' attention and resources.
So even in the most loving families, there's this undercurrent of competition,
Yeah.
all orchestrated by those selfish genes.
It's a powerful idea.
It makes you wonder if there's anything truly selfless in nature.
That's a question that Dawkins explores in depth.
Yeah.
And it leads to some pretty surprising conclusions. Okay.
But before we get to that,
Yeah.
let's delve into another arena where those selfish genes battle it out.
Okay.
The battle of the sexes.
Now we're talking.
Yeah,
I have a feeling things are about to get really interesting.
they are.
Okay.
And it all starts with a fundamental asymmetry.
Okay.
The difference in size and number between sperm and eggs.
Right.
Males produce millions of tiny sperm,
Okay.
while females produce a much smaller number of large,
Yeah.
resource-rich eggs.
So right from the start, females are investing more in each offspring.
Exactly. And that difference in investment has profound implications for how males and females approach mating and reproduction.
Right.
Males, who can potentially father many offspring with many different females,
Right.
often benefit from a high-risk, high-reward approach.
It's like they're playing the lottery,
Yeah.
hoping to hit the jackpot with as many tickets as possible.
A good analogy.
Yeah.
Females, on the other hand,
Okay.
are typically more selective about their mates.
Right. They're looking for partners who will provide good genes, resources, or parental care.
So it's like a high-stakes game of strategy,
Yeah.
with males competing for access to females.
Yeah.
And females carefully evaluating their options.
Precisely.
Wow.
And this difference in strategies leads to all sorts of fascinating adaptations.
Yeah.
From elaborate courtship displays to fierce competition between males.
So even something as fundamental as attraction and romance is influenced by those selfish genes.
It's not about romance in the human sense, but rather about genes driving behaviors that increase their chances of being passed on.
Right.
And this brings us to another seemingly paradoxical question.
Okay.
How can cooperation evolve in a world dominated by selfish genes?
Yeah, that always seemed confusing to me. If genes are all about maximizing their own survival,
Yeah.
wouldn't they always choose to cheat and exploit others?
It might seem that way.
Right.
But surprisingly, cooperation can be a very effective strategy for selfish genes. And the key to understanding this is game theory,
Game theory.
particularly the concept of the iterated prisoner's dilemma.
I vaguely remember that from college.
Yeah.
But can you refresh my memory?
Sure.
How does it relate to cooperation?
Imagine two individuals who are repeatedly interacting with each other.
Okay.
In each interaction, they have a choice: cooperate or defect.
Okay.
If they both cooperate, they both benefit.
Right.
If they both defect, they both suffer.
Yeah.
But if one cooperates and the other defects, the defector gets a big reward,
Okay.
and the cooperator gets a big penalty.
So it's like a game of trust,
Yeah.
where both parties are better off if they cooperate,
Yes.
but there's always a temptation to betray the other person.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that in a repeated game,
Okay.
where the players interact multiple times, cooperation can actually emerge as a stable strategy.
How is that possible?
Well,
Wouldn't the defectors always win in the end?
not necessarily. There's a famous computer tournament organized by Robert Axelrod
Okay.
where different strategies for playing the iterated prisoner's dilemma were pitted against each other.
Right.
And the winning strategy was surprisingly simple.
Okay.
It was called tit for tat.
Tit for tat.
Yeah.
That sounds more like a playground game.
It does.
Yeah.
But it's a remarkably effective strategy.
Okay.
It basically works like this.
Okay.
You cooperate on the first move,
Yeah.
then you do whatever your opponent did on the previous move.
Okay.
So if they cooperate, you cooperate. If
Fine.
they defect, you defect.
So it's a golden rule for game theory.
Yeah.
Do unto others as they have done unto you.
Exactly.
But how can something so simple be so successful?
Well, tit for tat is both nice and forgiving.
Okay.
It never defects first,
Right.
but it's also quick to retaliate if betrayed.
Right.
This combination makes it very difficult to exploit.
So even in a world of self-interest,
Yeah,
cooperation can emerge as a winning strategy.
they can.
That's kind of hopeful, actually.
It is.
Yeah.
And it has profound implications for understanding how cooperation evolved in nature,
Okay.
from symbiotic relationships between different species to complex human societies.
This is blowing my mind.
It is a fascinating topic.
We've covered so much already.
We have.
The basic premise of the selfish gene, altruism, parent-offspring conflict, the battle of the sexes, and now the evolution of cooperation.
Right. And it's all connected.
It is.
Yeah.
And we're not even done yet.
Wow.
There's still so much more to explore in the selfish gene,
Okay.
from the concept of the extended phenotype to the fascinating world of memes.
Memes.
Yeah.
Like those funny cat videos that go viral online.
Well, those are examples of memes,
Right.
but the concept is much broader.
Okay.
Dawkins uses the term to refer to any unit of cultural information that can be copied and transmitted from one mind to another.
Okay.
Ideas, beliefs, behaviors,
Yeah.
even fashion trends,
But memes are like genes.
but for culture instead of biology.
Exactly. And Dawkins argues that memes, like genes, can evolve and compete for survival.
Right.
But that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive.
Hey, wait, it'll be interesting.
Stay tuned, listeners. We'll be right back with more mind-bending insights from the selfish gene.
I'm looking forward to it.
Welcome back. I'm still reeling from all those insights about selfish genes battling it out in the natural world.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, but now we're moving from the world of biology
Right.
to the world of culture.
Exactly.
You mentioned something called memes before?
Yes, memes.
Okay.
It's one of the most thought-provoking ideas in the selfish gene,
Okay.
and one that extends the reach of evolutionary thinking beyond just our DNA.
Before the break, I joked about cat videos.
Right.
But I'm guessing it's a much bigger concept than that.
Definitely. Think of memes as the cultural equivalent of genes.
Okay.
Just like genes are units of biological information that get passed down.
Memes are units of cultural information that spread from person to person.
So ideas, beliefs,
Yes.
behaviors, those catchy jingles you can't get out of your head.
Right.
Those are all memes.
Exactly.
Right.
And just like genes, memes can vary. They can be replicated.
Yeah.
And some are more successful at spreading than others.
Right.
Dawkins argues that this sets the stage for a kind of cultural evolution.
So some memes go viral,
Exactly.
while others fade into obscurity.
Yes.
Just like some genes become more common while others disappear.
Precisely.
Okay.
Think about how quickly fashion trends change.
Right.
Or how a new slang word can suddenly be everywhere.
Yeah.
That's mimetic evolution in action.
But isn't culture much more complex than just copying and spreading memes?
Of course.
We don't just blindly imitate everything we see, do we?
Of course not.
Okay.
But even our most creative acts are often influenced by the memes we've been exposed to.
Right.
Memes provide the building blocks of our thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors. They shape how we see the world and how we interact with each other.
So memes are like the raw materials of culture,
Yes,
and our minds are constantly remixing and reimagining them.
that's a great way to put it.
Wow.
And this process of mimetic evolution can lead to incredible cultural diversity and innovation.
Okay.
Just think about the evolution of music.
Yeah.
From simple folk tunes to complex symphonies, or the development of technology, from the first stone tools to smartphones.
It's mind-blowing to think that the same principles that drive biological evolution might also be shaping our culture.
It really is a powerful idea.
But if memes are like selfish genes,
Yes.
does that mean that culture is inherently selfish too?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of what makes the meme concept so controversial.
Okay.
Dawkins argues that memes, like genes, are ultimately driven by their own survival and replication.
Okay.
They don't necessarily care about the well-being of the individuals they inhabit.
So a meme might spread even if it's harmful to the people who carry it.
Exactly.
Wow.
Think about chain letters or urban legends that spread fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
They might not be good for us individually,
Right.
but they're very effective at replicating themselves.
It's kind of unsettling to think that our minds could be hijacked by these self-serving bits of information.
It is a thought-provoking idea.
Yeah.
And Dawkins argues that we need to be aware of the influence of memes and
Yeah.
develop critical thinking skills to avoid being manipulated.
Right.
Just as we have immune systems to protect us from harmful viruses, we need mental immune systems to protect us from harmful memes.
So we need to be discerning meme consumers, not mindless meme zombies.
Exactly.
Right.
We have a responsibility to choose which memes we embrace and which we reject.
Yeah, but it's not always easy to tell the good memes from the bad, is it?
No, it's not.
Especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information from all directions.
Right.
It can feel like a mimetic battleground out there.
It is.
Yeah.
And this brings us to another fascinating layer of complexity.
Okay.
The potential conflict between genes and memes.
Wait, they can be in conflict?
Sometimes.
But aren't they both just trying to survive and replicate?
They are,
Yeah.
but sometimes their interests diverge.
Okay.
Think about the meme for celibacy, for example.
Celibacy.
Yeah.
How can a meme for not having children survive if it prevents people from passing on their genes? That seems like an evolutionary dead end.
It would be for genes.
Yeah.
But remember, memes play by different roles.
Right.
A meme for celibacy can spread if it's successful at persuading people to devote their time and energy to promoting that meme,
Okay.
even at the expense of having children.
So a celibate priest might not pass on his genes,
Right.
but he might inspire others to embrace celibacy,
Exactly.
thereby spreading the meme.
Yes,
It's like a genetic sacrifice for the sake of mimetic success.
exactly. And Dawkins argues that religious memes, in general, are particularly adept at exploiting our psychological vulnerabilities to spread their influence.
He even compares religious beliefs to viruses that infect our minds.
Yes.
Right.
He uses that analogy to highlight how some memes can spread rapidly and tenaciously, even if they're not necessarily beneficial to their hosts.
It's both fascinating and a bit frightening to think about how these two powerful forces, genes and memes, are constantly shaping our lives.
Right.
Sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict.
It's a powerful idea.
Yeah, it makes you question everything.
It does.
But before we spiral into an existential crisis,
Okay.
let's bring this back to something a bit more concrete.
Sure.
Earlier, you mentioned the concept of the extended phenotype.
Yes.
What exactly is that?
Okay.
And how does it fit into this whole gene-meme interplay?
The extended phenotype is one of Dawkins's most brilliant and controversial ideas.
Okay.
It challenges the traditional view of where a gene's influence begins and ends. We tend to think of a gene's effects as being limited to the body of the organism it inhabits.
Right.
But Dawkins argues that a gene's phenotype, its observable effects, can extend beyond the individual organism and into the environment.
Okay, I'm going to need an example to wrap my head around this.
Sure, imagine a beaver building a dam.
Okay.
The dam is clearly not part of the beaver's body,
Right.
but it's a product of the beaver's genes.
Okay.
Just as much as its teeth or its fur.
So the dam is part of the beaver's extended phenotype.
Exactly.
It's a physical manifestation of its genes in the environment.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the dam, in turn, has a profound impact on the surrounding ecosystem.
Okay.
It creates wetlands, alters water flow,
Yeah.
and influences the distribution of plants and animals.
Right.
So the beaver's genes are indirectly shaping the entire landscape.
It's like those ripple effects you see when you drop a stone in a pond.
Yes.
The gene is the stone, and its effects spread outward, influencing the environment and other organisms.
That's a great visualization.
Yeah.
And this concept of the extended phenotype has implications for understanding all sorts of biological phenomena,
Okay.
from parasitism to cooperation between species.
So a parasite's genes might manipulate the behavior of its host to increase its own chances of survival and reproduction.
Exactly.
That's kind of creepy, but also incredibly clever.
Nature is full of surprises.
Yeah.
Think of a parasitic worm that alters the behavior of its host,
Okay.
making it more likely to be eaten by a predator.
Right.
This benefits the worm because it needs to get inside that predator to complete its life cycle.
Wow. So the parasite's genes are pulling the strings.
Yes.
Even though they're not physically present in the predator.
Right.
It's like a genetic remote control.
Exactly.
That's wild.
And Dawkins argues that even seemingly cooperative relationships between different species can be understood in terms of extended phenotypes.
How? So I thought cooperation implied a shared benefit,
Well,
like the bees and the flowers. They both need each other, right?
they do. But those benefits are ultimately driven by the selfish genes of each species involved.
Okay.
Think about it. Flowers have evolved elaborate structures and colors to attract insects and birds,
Yeah.
which then carry pollen from one flower to another, enabling fertilization.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
The flowers get pollinated, and the pollinators get nectar or pollen as a reward.
Yes, but from a gene's perspective, the flower is manipulating the pollinator's behavior to its own advantage.
Okay.
Its genes have built the structure of the flower.
Right.
That's essentially a billboard designed to attract pollinators.
So the flower's genes are indirectly controlling the pollinator's behavior, even though they're not physically present in the pollinator.
Precisely.
It's all starting to make sense now.
It is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, and it makes you wonder how much of our own behavior is influenced by the extended phenotypes of other organisms.
That's a great question.
We're constantly interacting with plants, animals, and even microbes.
We are.
That's a great point. We've talked about genes competing, genes cooperating,
Right.
and now genes reaching beyond the individual to shape the environment.
It's a lot to think about.
Where does this all lead?
Mhm.
Is there any room for free will in a world where we're constantly being pulled and pushed by these invisible forces?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that Dawkins tackles head-on in the final chapters of The Selfish Gene.
Well, listeners, it looks like we're headed for another cliffhanger.
It'll be an exciting finish.
Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll explore the ultimate implications of the selfish gene. From the tension between genes and memes, to the big questions about free will and the meaning of life.
I can't wait.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the selfish gene. I'm still processing all the mind-bending concepts we've explored so far.
Me too. It's a lot to take in.
Selfish genes,
Yeah.
extended phenotypes,
Yeah.
those cultural replicators called memes.
Powerful stuff.
That's a whole new way of looking at the world.
It really is. And as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
we're going to tackle some of the biggest questions raised by the selfish gene. The potential conflicts between genes and memes,
Right.
the limits of free will,
Yeah.
and ultimately what it all means for us as humans.
Okay, so let's start with this tension between genes and memes. We've talked about how they can cooperate,
Right.
but how does this conflict play out? It feels like an epic battle for control.
It is an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, playing out right inside our minds.
Remember, genes are all about survival and reproduction over generations.
Right.
While memes are driven by their ability to spread through culture,
Yeah.
even if that sometimes clashes with genetic imperatives.
So a meme might encourage behavior that actually reduces an individual's chances of passing on their genes.
That's right.
I'm trying to wrap my head around how that could work from an evolutionary perspective.
Dawkins argues that it comes down to the different lifespans and goals of genes and memes.
Okay.
A meme can spread like wildfire through a population,
Right.
achieving a kind of success even if it doesn't directly benefit the individuals carrying it.
So it's like a meme can hitch a ride on our cultural transmission systems,
Yeah.
even if it's not good for us in the long run.
That's the idea.
Okay.
Think about those extreme fad diets that promise quick weight loss,
Oh, yeah.
but might actually be harmful to your health.
Yeah.
They spread because they're catchy and appealing,
Right.
not necessarily because they're good for your genes' survival prospects.
Okay, so some memes can be like parasites,
That's one way to look at it.
exploiting our cultural vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if our modern world, with its constant flow of information,
Yeah.
is making us more susceptible to these kinds of mimetic hijacking.
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
And one that Dawkins himself has explored in later works.
Okay.
The internet, social media,
Right.
these are powerful mimetic ecosystems.
Okay.
And it's crucial to develop those critical thinking skills we talked about earlier
Yeah.
to navigate this landscape effectively.
So we need to be savvy meme consumers.
Yeah.
Not just passive receptacles for whatever information comes our way.
Exactly. We have a responsibility to be aware of the influences shaping our thoughts and behaviors, and to choose wisely which memes we embrace.
This brings us back to the question of free will.
Okay.
If we're constantly being influenced by our genes and memes, are we really in control of our own destinies? It can all feel a bit deterministic.
It's a profound question, and one that the selfish gene doesn't offer any easy answers to.
Right.
Dawkins acknowledges that our biology and our culture exert powerful influences on us, but he also suggests that we're not simply puppets of these forces.
So there's still room for agency for making conscious choices.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
Dawkins argues that our capacity for reason, for critical thinking, allows us to step back from the immediate pull of our genes and memes,
Yeah.
and to make choices that are aligned with our own values and goals.
It's like we can become aware of the puppet strings
Yeah,
and choose how to move,
that's a great way to think about it.
even if we can't completely sever them.
A brilliant analogy, and this awareness, this capacity for self-reflection,
Yeah.
is what makes us uniquely human.
Okay.
We're not just products of our genes and memes.
Right.
We're also the architects of our own destinies,
Okay.
even if we operate within certain constraints.
It's a hopeful message.
It is.
And it's empowering, too.
I agree.
It suggests that we're not just passive passengers on this evolutionary journey.
Right.
We have the power to steer the ship, at least to some extent.
Exactly. The selfish gene is a call to consciousness,
Okay.
an invitation to understand the forces shaping our lives,
Yeah.
and to use that understanding to make more informed choices.
So it's not a recipe for nihilism or despair,
Not at all.
but rather a framework for understanding our place in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
And for embracing our responsibility as conscious beings.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately the most important takeaway from the selfish gene. Okay.
It's a book that challenges us to think deeply about who we are,
Yeah.
where we came from,
Right.
and where we're going as individuals and as a species.
This has been such an incredible journey.
It has.
We've explored the depths of the selfish gene,
We have.
from those ruthless replicators to the complex interplay of genes and memes.
It's fascinating stuff.
And I think we've all come away with a richer understanding of the forces shaping our lives
I hope so.
and the amazing power of evolution, both biological and cultural.
It's been a privilege to share these ideas with you and our listeners.
Absolutely. And if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity,
Yeah.
I encourage you to pick up The Selfish Gene
It's a great book.
and delve into this fascinating world for yourself.
I highly recommend it.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into The Selfish Gene. Thank you for joining us on this intellectual adventure. Until next time, keep those minds open.